My name is Richard Furrow, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Google Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the GlowCloud team.
Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs, and I am here to answer any career questions you have. I remember what it was like for me 25 years ago when I was leaving my healthcare job and I was moving into tech. If I only knew the strategy at first, I would have gotten to my goals a lot quicker. And what I ultimately did once I got my first job, I went and asked the VP at the company, what do you want and the best architects you have? What kind of architects get promoted? And I started building a list of experts that said what we want and the people we hired. I ultimately learned those things that the experts told me. I was a principal architect within 2 years. I basically functioned as a chief architect for an entire industry vertical in one of the largest tech companies in the world, Cisco. And I had the absolute best architecture career. And I'm here to help you achieve the same success. So when you're new and you don't know where to go, I come here once a week, usually from 2 to 4 p.m. on Wednesdays. Not always at this time, but I definitely try to do so. So please bring us your questions because you have two ways you can learn. You can learn by making errors along the way and get a career that does this. Or you could learn from others who've already made the mistakes or coached others out of these mistakes or helped others to get out of these mistakes and go straight up. And that's what I want for you to have the best career. Let me tell you about a couple of free things we have, and then I'll get to answering any questions you have. And please bring these questions to me because I want to help you build your career. Maybe you want to become a cloud architect or a solutions architect or an AI architect or an enterprise architect or a security architect. These are the kind of things that we will talk about. So on Thursday this week, and basically Thursday every week, we run a How to Become an Architect webinar. Most of them I do on the basis of a cloud architect, but if you're curious about a security architect, an AI architect, an enterprise architect, or anything else, I'll cover them on this webinar. I'll also spend at least an hour answering any questions you have. You think you're ready for a job, you want me to mini interview, I'll do it. You want me to look at your LinkedIn profile if you're not getting hits, I'll do it. Anything I can do. And it's this Thursday and every Thursday free. The link is in the chat box and the description of this video. Now, also in the chat box, there are so many guides on how to get your first cloud architect job or security or enterprise architect job or AI architect job. There's guides on how to win the interview and many other things to help you in your career. And they're all free. So please check them out in the description of this video. And I hope to they help you in your career because they're completely free. So Chris, would you like to bring in some questions? I think they're starting to come in, and don't be shy. I can't help if you don't ask me. Please share resources on how to design a technical and a solution architecture. Sanjay, great question. So I want you to really understand what it takes to design the solutions architecture. For real, not like in a certification. And I've been every kind of architect you can imagine for the last 25 years. And I've also coached architects that are now working at Apple, Amazon, Cisco, Google, IBM, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, and every other company you can think of. So the key to remember is you don't just start trying to design a solution. The first thing that any architect does, and by the way, Sanjay, this is the difference between a $130,000 architect and an $800,000 architect. And the better you are at this, the more you will earn, is we, before we can design a solution, need to understand what the problem is that we're actually trying to solve. So a real architect, a true strategist is going to go in, they're going to meet with the client's executive team, which is why you need to have executive presence, CXO relevancy, sales skills, and business acumen kind of thing. You're going to ask the executives, could you tell us about your business? Could you tell us about your business goals, your business pain points, your business challenges? Could you tell us what your growth rate is and where you're trying to go in the next 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years? Because Sanjay, that's the first art of an architecture, is to know where you're trying to go. No different than planning a trip. If you want to go to, say, Mysore, or I wanted to go to Mysore because there's a lot of Ashtanga there, I would make sure that I would leave my house. I would go to one airport. I would take that airport to London. From London, I would go to Bangalore. And from Bangalore, I would drive to Mysore, for example. But if you don't know where you're going, you can't build your destination plan. So first, we need to understand that. Well, the next phase, Sanjay, is actually understanding the business architecture. Now, that is how that organization makes money, how that organization is structured from a business perspective, the business processes that the organization needs, and how they do certain things, like how they create a product, how they sell a product, for example, and look for any inefficiencies that are there and help improve the way people do their jobs. Now, after we do that, once we know where the company is trying to go, now the next step is for, say, a cloud architect or a security architect or a solutions architect, depending upon where you're working, to create an architecture team that's going to be 15 to 50 people. Now, you're going to use that architecture team to see what's in the client's data centers, to see what's in the client's 2 or 3 clouds, to see what's in the client's 30 or 40 SaaS providers, and understand what's going on with the 50 to 100 applications that most organizations actually have. And that's where you're going to have to create an architecture team, and you're going to have to lead that architecture team. Now, at that point, when you know where they want to go and you have the strategy and you know what you have, you and your architecture team are going to do a gap analysis. So you're going to say, these are the things we want to do. In order to get to what we want to do, these are the things that we're going to need, but these are the things that we have. So you're going to have to build a plan that's going to go from what they have to what they need. Now, that plan is going to take a serious amount of time, because you're going to have to speak with the company's stakeholders and get their input on the plan, go back to the plan, go into the plan, go back to the plan. So you're going to have 3 to 4 months of stakeholder conversations and architectural design with the team of people that you actually lead. Now, when it's finally time and you finalize it, you'll take your architecture, which is the reality of what's going to be drawn. And let's say, for example, I had a three cloud architecture or a hybrid multi-cloud architecture. And I had the same web application deployed across 3 demilitarized zones in 3 different cloud architectures. So then I would say, what am I doing? Okay, it's going to run on a virtual machine in my data center. Okay, so in my data center, it's a VMware virtual machine. Solution architecture-wise, that virtual machine is now called an AWS EC2 instance, and now the ones in Azure are called an Azure virtual machine, but it's the identical tech and everything. So that's where we go from the actual architecture to the solutions architecture, which merely involves swapping the technology for the brand name and the actual manufacturer's part that we're actually using. Now, once we create that design, we have to go back to the client with the design. We have solutions architects, because you're part of a pre-sales team. You've got to help sell that to the client's executives. And then you have to create a governance structure around the new architecture. So how it would be implemented, who's going to oversee the implementation, when changes need to be made, how those changes are actually going to be made. And then you'll create some marketing collateral around the change. And then after that, you'll be in good shape. So that's the architect job. You know what, Sanjay, I'd really like you to attend my completely free How to Become a Cloud Architect webinar. And in that webinar, I'm going to go over the role very deeply, because 75% of this role is not tech. It's not tech at all. It's executive skills. This is a job of, okay, client, you're going to invest $1 billion in technology. For the $1 billion of technology, we're going to solve three business problems, and it's going to be worth $4 billion too. It's going to be something that's more related to that. So it's a whole innovation process that we have to use. Most of this job is about asking people questions, communicating between executive needs and techies that are actually going to build it. It's the best job in the world. So let's take it from there. And if there's other questions, I'd love to answer them. I really want to help you move into this wonderful career. Hi, Mike and team. You're wondering if you need certifications. So, to and Hughes, this is one of the best questions you could possibly ask. And I'm going to give you the real answer is it depends. And here's what I mean. If you are in a VP level position, a director level position, a CISO level position, a chief architect position, no, you definitely don't need certifications. And quite frankly, too, and Hughes, when I made it to the chief architect level, my management asked me to take my CCIE and my CISSP off of my business cards because they wanted people to see me as an executive as opposed to the techie, so I could be more influential strategy-wise. Now, that doesn't necessarily answer the question. And the reason I gave you an it depends is let's talk about where you're at in your career. If you're someone like David Lithicum or someone like me or someone like Russ White, where you have a big track record for driving digital transformation, you don't need any certifications. Nobody's even going to think or care about the certifications whatsoever. Sorry, hit a water bottle I had next to me. Now, by comparison, if you're brand new, and let's say you're completely trained to be an architect, and I'm going to make it very clear, there's nothing in these certifications that teaches anything about architecture. But let's say you've got all the architect skills. How does anybody really know about it? So the thing is, what you have to do, too, and Hughes, is you have to get trained for the job. And, you know, when they train physicians, when they train nurses, they have many years of training before you can even take the certification. And when it comes to the careers and it comes to getting hired, you have to be in the top 25%. And that's why we train our people to be in the top 25%, because the top 25% always gets hired. No one cares about your experience when you're the best of the best. Now, think about that. So when you have the best of the best skills, you still need a marketing campaign. So that's why we teach certain selective certifications that are strategic to our students on our programs. And if you're curious about that, I'd be happy to tell you. But that's not enough. We actually coach people on how to build a perfect resume, because a perfect resume will basically make you 2.3 times more likely to get an interview. And that means a 230% increase in number of interviews means more chances to get hired. But it also takes cleaning up your social media, which we teach people, and it also takes knowing how to interview when we coach that as well. But think about the whole thing when it takes to getting hired. It's the whole package. It's the top 25% tech skills. It's the certifications to go out there and show you're great. So for a security architect, we train a CISSP, a CISM, and a CCSP because they're the three best. And that way you've got the skills, you've got the brand, then you tune your resume to get more interviews, then you tune your social media profile to show why companies need to hire you, because I said 87% of recruiters source directly from LinkedIn. And then the rest of it is about mastering the interview. But you don't need certifications, but they can be used strategically. So it is where you're at in your career and what you're trying to use them. Kind of keep that in the back of your mind. You want to be a world-class architect. I know some things here, but not to the core. What do you recommend I do? The path I take. So, DE, here's what I'm going to tell you. To be the best, you either have to be trained by the best or beat the best or be coached by the best. So what I would tell you is, if you want to be an architect, I recommend you take art training, because in art training, it's developed by architects like me who've got 25 years as architects. Sometimes, for example, I was out a few weeks with back surgery. David Lithicum was teaching my class, and he's got about 35 years in various architectural roles as well. And when you learn from the best, you become the best. But how would I build a perfect architecture career? What would I do from scratch? I'll tell you what I did to get to the chief architect role, and then I'll tell you the way I train people now. So what I did, which is I came from a healthcare background where I learned how to practice internal medicine as a nurse practitioner. That was the best architecture training in the world, because it taught me how to ask the right question. It taught me how to learn a lot of information, analyze a lot of information, make a diagnosis, and build a plan. So as it turned out, I got lucky. That was great architecture training. But, you know, I could train you in that. Management strategy consultants also get taught on how to do that kind of consulting work. Now, the next side of it is business acumen. So if you're going to improve a client's business performance and you don't know business, you can't help them at all. Now, you can still build stuff for them as an engineer, but you can't be an architect without knowing business. And the reality is, the better your business skills are, the better your ability is to drive transformation. And that's why your best architects, the highest paid architects, don't get very close to the technology. They're very close to the business. And business means people. It means processes and technology. So that's kind of the key there. Now, at the same time, one of the things that actually makes a good architect a great architect is the ability to build a team. And I can tell you, DE, I've worked on architectures, most of them where I was a subject matter expert, but I've also been the lead architect or the chief architect on something where I knew nothing about the technology. And I can tell you, I had to provide a voice solution to one of the largest banks in the world when I was at one of the biggest tech companies, and I knew nothing of voice. And I got told, Mike, you are the chief architect on this project. And then there I'm like, but I don't know voice. And what they said is, Mike, you can build a team of anyone you want. So I found distinguished engineers, distinguished architects, consulting systems engineers, and all the best. I built my team of 18 people. I led that team of 18 people, and it was one of the most notable IP telephony unified communications designs in its day as far as bank innovation. But the key was I had the leadership skills to build that team of 18, to drive that team of 18 to really results. Now, I wish it was on a technology like I usually knew, which would be video or IP multicast or BGP or something. It wasn't, but that was when I learned, and that was about 20 some years ago, that it's more about your ability to lead a team because, as the African proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I would say those are there. The next side is really being an expert in sales. Now, when you're an expert in sales, you can sell yourself into the $500,000 architect job versus the $250,000 architect job. And that's going to be the big part of the difference is sales and business acumen. But the better you are at sales, the better you are at selling yourself. And whether that's on a job interview, whether that's selling yourself and your solution to the client, it has a huge impact on your financial means. And the better you can exercise influence and build relationships and deliver, that's typically your name and your brand. Now, having said that, I still believe in very strong tech fundamentals. But fundamentals are not how to build. Fundamentals are how to design. There's a series of about 10 questions that I can ask. And in these 10 questions, I can know, does the person know anything about architecture and can I hire them? Or do they think architecture is something else and they have absolutely no idea? Maybe I'll make a video about the 10 biggest questions I can ask to determine if I can hire someone or not. Let me know if you'd like a video on that, on some interview questions that a lot of managers use to disqualify people very quickly. And if you do in the chat box, let me know and I'll make a video on that because that could be a good one. The gotcha questions that really block most people from getting hired. So there's that. Now, when it comes to projects, DE, I want you to do the right kind of projects as an architect. So what do we do as architects? We write thought leadership documents. We write reference architectures. We give architectural presentations. We create architectural artifacts, for example. We create technology roadmaps. We create strategic solutions. We look at various industries and problems that they have and create architectural blueprints to help solve them. That's architecture work. So those are the kind of things. But if you're with us, you're going to be doing all of them. And if you're with us, what you could also take is our executive architect program, if you are curious. And I'll tell you what that actually is. So it's our regular architect program, which, has people working everywhere. But what happened is we worked with some business school professors and created a business acumen training program. And I don't want to turn this into a sales thing. I'm just saying what we did is I took a bunch of MBAs and we added a little mini functional MBA program. So my recommendation is get something like that or get an MBA long-term to enhance your business acumen. And that's really where I'm coming from, because there's going to be some things you learn in a business school. Like, for example, the net present value of something and looking at an organization's weighted average cost of capital and how you might use that to create something in the data center versus the cloud. You're going to get that in an MBA program, for example. But what you didn't get in an MBA program, which I didn't get, was executive presence and how to really command a room and how to lead very good and the softer, finer touches of management, which I turned that into something else. But if you come to tomorrow's webinar, I'll talk about all the secrets that you can do to create your first architect job, things that'll help you stand out and get to any kind of goal you desire in your career. Hi, Mike. If one of your first job assignments was to outline a gap in the organizational security systems and create a document for the CIO and CSO, how would you go about this? Dingleman, congratulations on that wonderful security architect. As I mentioned, I sent you a message that I knew what was going on paperwork wise. So congratulations again. You were super smart from the day I met you, and that got you into great engineering and now a great architecture role. So congratulations. So that's going to be a lot of what you want to do. So the first thing you really need to think about is, what does that organization need, Dingleman? So where should it be? And there's a couple ways you can get it. You can determine what your future state is and then work backwards and create a gap analysis. I'm going to keep that in the back of your mind. So what I mean is you create the perfect strategy. And create the perfect strategy of what you wanted and then look at what you have and determine the gaps. That's your typical architecture gap analysis. Now, they could also be looking for is, what are your architecture gaps between best practices or a standard framework? So what I think you need to do is first is identify and scope what they're actually looking for. So are they looking for the entire architecture? Because if they are, it's going to be a very different gap analysis. This is going to take several months, and this is probably what they're looking for. So, for example, if I were to look at an organization and they said, Mike, what do we need to do to bring it up to something reasonable? I'd first understand the assets that we had. I'd understand the risk to those assets and our actual risk costs and our risk management options. I would then create a strategy, and I would look at where they're at, Dingleman. Now, if they're in the data center, we can create a really strong defense in depth strategy and a very good IAM strategy. Now, if they're cloud and have something really strong, leveraging modern day IAM practices in a data center with hard, strong boundaries, and with that, you're going to have very different gaps than if you're, say, in a cloud provider with those very soft boundaries where you need to put in a lot of other protections because you lost many of the protections in the data center. And that may drive you more towards a zero trust architecture than a defense in depth architecture because of the weaknesses inherent to cloud security compared to data center security, specifically around boundaries. So there is that, but bring that one in class and we can talk about it in class a little more. I know you're working, but I'm happy for you to pop in class and we can dive a little deeper in it. But the real key is to figure out what the target is. If the target is where you need it to be and you're looking at it and say, okay, they have one set of next generation firewalls, but these firewalls don't do behavioral anomaly detection, and you feel that they should have another set of next generation firewalls that has behavioral anomaly detection, put the behavioral anomaly detection down to something that's there. If you look at their IAM systems and they look like their standard role-based access control, but now you start having a lot of people coming in from weird IP addresses and people that travel, maybe it's time to think about a context-aware IAM system and then think about all that's missing and all the steps that are necessary to get there. You've got access to 13 different SaaS providers, and you have to think of an IAM strategy, how to do it. And right now you've got people that have got different logins for each. Maybe you need a cloud access security broker. So that's what I would do. I would find out first what the end goal is, but figure out and define what the end goal is, the target, then define exactly what you need to get to the target, and then look at exactly what you have, and hopefully the engineers can help you build an inventory of what you have, and then build yourself a plan to figure out everything you need, and don't do it by yourself. If you have the opportunity to bring in a couple other people, maybe someone from operations that knows something about security operations, maybe someone with some deep engineering, maybe they've got someone that's been doing some vulnerability management that knows more than just how to, they understand vulnerabilities for real. Bring them on your team and they will help you create the gaps. That'll get you to a lot of goals. Is it safe to take a technical architect job without possible experience? Is it possible to run on the job? Okay, so Sanjay, I have people who get their first job as architects every day. Every day. As solutions architects, as enterprise architects, security architects every day. Now, that's very different than a technical architect. A technical architect isn't an architect, it's an engineer that focuses on design. That is a very different kind of position. Now, Sanjay, what I need you to, and it's going to be a much lower paying position, the technical architect, just understand that. Its potential for career advancement is not there, and it will pay. Just keep in mind, if you focus on the technical side of design versus the transformation side of design, it's the difference between $150,000 and $500,000 and a $500,000 a year job. And it's not really necessarily one of the places you might want to be long term, but just think about that in the way the world's changing and moving. It's up to you. But that's why solutions architects, cloud architects, enterprise architects, AI architects are more safe. And that's why I don't teach technical architecture. But I do teach the technical architecture side of it in an architect class, but I also teach the entire architect piece. But it's not about your experience. I want to make it clear, experience is irrelevant. You know what happens when a doctor starts their first day at work? They do the same job as a doctor that's been there for 50 years. Nothing changes. And they know how to do it. Do you know what an airplane pilot does on his first day at work? Flies the plane the same way as every other airplane pilot. Now, what determines how good you are at your job is how much you know. Now, I'll give you an example of someone that could. I interviewed someone, and I remember interviewing the person, and he had no background in experience, but he was there for a serious network architect position. Never worked in his life. And I got a serious architect position as my first tech job. But I remembered I've always been a big fan of the OSPF routing protocol and the ISIS, intermediate systems routing protocol. And when this person came in, I asked him some questions on OSPF, and I said, I want to see how good you are. And he said, okay. And I said, could you tell me the LSAs that exist in OSPF? And he rattled off all the OSPF LSAs. And then I said, could you tell me what areas have what LSAs? And he rattled them all off. And I said, okay, now I have a wide area networking link, and I have about 800 redistributed external routes, and that link keeps flapping. Could you talk to me about what's going to happen in the OSPF domain? And he literally starts talking to me about the LSA floods that are coming in and coming out, and the routers calculating, and how the CPUs may hit 100% of the routers reboot and crash. And I said, congratulations, you're hired. Because he had all the knowledge. He had all the skills. It wasn't like he just knew how to. He knew the why not, the rationale, and he was great. So I've hired lots of people without experience, and I've also hired people with experience. Experience is irrelevant. It's how good you are. That's all that matters. So I've literally worked with people, and at one point I worked in strategic outsourcing, and I tried to find what people did. I found some people, I couldn't figure out what they did, and they couldn't figure out what they did in these companies either. But they had experience, but they weren't doing anything. And when you asked them deep technical questions, they had 20 years experience, but knew nothing. Not enough to be hired. They were there, and somehow they were stay there. And I'm so happy they had their jobs. And, but keep in mind, if you're good, an example would be Pierre, who we trained, who got hired in LeaseWeb in Canada as a solutions architect, his first job. When you're good, you're hired, like Yvonne at AWS. Keep that in the back of your mind. Because I think there's a second half of this. Do you need to have hands-on experience in any one of the tools like master data, meta management, data governance? It depends on the role. So Sanjay, as architects, we don't touch the technology. I don't know how to use any tools. The only tools that I've ever worked and used in my 25-year architecture career is Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft PowerPoint, and Microsoft Visio. Because we don't touch the technology. Now, Sanjay, let me kind of give you a different perspective of what you're thinking for. You're thinking of engineering, which is how do I do the tech stuff? Here's what I need you to do with architecture. So Sanjay, if I had an architect, I might say, okay, architect, could you talk to me? We have 5 petabytes of data, but it's not the cleanest data. Could you tell me what we need to do in order to create a generative AI system that's going to do X, Y, Z function? Could you evaluate our data, determine what we need to do with that data, determine how we need to mine that data, clean up that data, and normalize that data, how we then need to store and organize that data, and then how we would pick a model and how we would train a model. And I'd be concerned of your knowledge on how to do all of that, but I wouldn't care if you could configure it, because that's the job of an engineer, not an architect. So it's your hands-on experience in design. That's what's going to get you hired. Remember, architects don't touch the technology. Now, you will be presenting in front of a conference of 3,000 people, and they will be very concerned. You could be presenting at an airline conference, and you might be talking about how you could take data, mine that data with machine learning, and further analyze that data, and then create a price prediction time when that airline should buy its fuel or not. That's architecture. Engineering is what are the 3 parts that fit together, and how do I build it? So I think you have to determine which career you're actually interested in. Is it the engineering you want to do? Or is it the architecture side? But architecture side is not about tools. Architecture is driving a transformation. Architecture is about making a hospital have less patients that die and more patients that get out safely. Architecture is about making a business that sells things on the internet be able to sell more because they created a better website, a better experience. That's what we're really talking about. That's architecture. Great question. What is the real impact on AI and software development? If yes, when will it be? Based on our experience, please predict the top 5 skill sets in software development. So, Varesh, I can already tell you there are already substantial layoffs of software developers at major companies. It's already happened, and it's been happening for about a year. Microsoft writes 25+% of their code. Google writes 25+% of their code. Meta writes 25+% of their code. IBM laid off, and I already talked about laying off for software developers. So expect some roles to be deleted and some roles to be not. Now, there's going to be some roles that can never go away. Now, the roles that can never go away are, and I'll tell you why, and then I'll tell you why software development is the most dangerous. And then I'm going to tell you which people will still make it in software development and which people will likely be replaced in the next 5 years. So the jobs that are always going to be safe are sales reps, and they're high-paid tech jobs, solutions architects, cloud architects, enterprise architects, AI architects, security architects, chief information security officers, chief information officers, VPs, senior directors, and senior leadership. And strategists of all times, and they can't be replaced. And the reason they can't be replaced is their job takes a lot of person-to-person questions. It takes emotional intelligence. It takes empathy. It takes relationship building. Plus, these take expertise where you're evaluating trade-offs. You're building a blueprint. You're building a strategy. None of that AI can do. And that's why those jobs are always safe. Now, software development and coding, AI can code all day. AI is already better than the bottom 30% of software developers that are out there. And AI could replace today the bottom 30%. And we're starting to see that happen, and it's really sad. Now, the reason is what AI can do is it can code real nice. It can write a Python script. It can write a Terraform script, a Bash shell script, any of that stuff, which is why it's great that architects don't do this, executives don't do this. Now, it can do that, but what AI can't do is think. So AI can't create the application architecture for an application. For example, an application architect might look at the business needs, the business goals, the business pain points, the business workflows, what the user interface needs to be, what the user experience needs to be, and then the architectural design of it. That needs to be done by an architect, and that can't be replaced. Now, if we have a principal developer or a distinguished developer that is in the ability to evaluate this technology is better than this for this and this and why, what are the trade-offs between the two, where are the performance limitations, how do we optimize this, they're safe. Those are the top 25%, and they're worth their weight in gold. But going out there and just writing code, that's a skill of yesterday. Going out there and writing a Bash shell script or a Python script, junior level sysadmin, junior level cloud engineers, that's done. And Varesh, that's why we had a cloud engineering program, and 2.5, 3 years ago, I stopped selling it. I didn't want to train people for jobs that no longer exist. And I see engineering jobs getting decreased. Now, at the same time as we get rid of engineering jobs, because the tech can be better in many cases than some engineers and some help desk people, the architects and the strategists say, well, look at this other cool stuff that AI can do. We can do this better. We can improve performance here. We can do this cheaper. We can make the business go in another direction and then bring in another set of people and employ them for a different kind of job. So it's not going to be a zero-sum game where everybody just loses their job. But it's going to be we used to have people in the escalators that pushed a button to go from floor to floor. We don't have that anymore. We used to go to a travel agent where people that would book your travel. We don't do that anymore. We book our own travel. So we have to look at that. When the NVIDIA CEO said, in 5 years, everybody will code and all they're going to have to say is talk to their computer. You have to understand, and the Microsoft CEO said SaaS is dead because AI will create it for everybody. These are the strategists. These are the people that are spending, $500 billion, these big companies or more to make it happen. And when you've got the top strategists, the top smartest people in the world, and, $1 trillion or so funding in the next couple of years coming into this across the world, you will be surprised. So jobs that involve strategy, jobs that involve sales, jobs that involve planning, jobs that involve leadership, nothing that involves hands-on doing. Focusing on trade-offs, top skills, the logic behind the applications, the performance, all of those people are good. But the hands-on stuff, that's the problem. And sadly, it's already happening. I wish it wasn't. But none of these have any impacts on cloud architects because they create more opportunities for us. Because now every business is saying, Mike, we got all this data gold mine. How can we use this to automate this process? How can we use this to create a customer experience? How do we use this data and make money on it? How do we create an AI agents that do this? So that's where the opportunity is. It's for the cloud architect, the security architect, the AI architect, all the strategists. Assume that a lot of the tech will be able to help build itself, not that far away in the future. Rohit, are there any specializations for cloud architects for K8 containers? So, Rohit, that's a good question. So I do have friends that work as principal architects at a company where they just focus on containers. Now, having said that, I do want you to understand this. Your value as an architect is the ability to help your client. An $800,000 chief architect has the ability to help their client. And the only way you really help your client is people, processes, technology. And that means having the right people, having the people do it in the right way, and then delivering the technology. Now, that is your most valuable skill as an architect. The second you look at K8s, which is a single technology, you lose all value as a strategist. You lose all value as the ability to drive any kind of transformation. And now all of a sudden you're focused on the technology. So there are ways that you can do it. So early in my career, I was an expert on IP multicast. There were probably 5 of us in the world. We all knew each other. It was Bill Williamson at Cisco. It was me at Riverstone. There were a guy in Wales that I knew. There weren't that many of us. And we were all, the 5 people that were in multicast. And that got me so far. But at the end of the day, it was just IP multicast. And then I had a manager that really changed my life about a year and a half earlier. And he said, Mike, do you want to be here or do you want to be up here? And as soon as he said, I was like, I want to be up here, it all became me getting closer to the technology. So you can focus on the tech and be a strategist. But quite frankly, I don't really need a K8 expert on my team. I really don't. And in most cases, I might have one inside of an organization. And that K8 expert's probably going to be working for my cloud architect, who's probably going to be working for my enterprise architect, who's working for my CIO. Now, all of a sudden, I've got an architect that's got much better business skills, and they report directly to the CIO. And their next job is a CIO. So it all depends on what you want to focus on. I have focused on being a tech expert in the past, and it was fun. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Or you can focus on being a strategist. But you wouldn't be a cloud architect focused on Kubernetes. You'd just be a Kubernetes subject matter expert. And that'll be, keep that in the back of your mind. But you could do it. Okay. Take one live session, share your screen, and explains how to design different systems like Amazon. Well, you know what? To tell you what it would take to design a system like Amazon for real would take me 1,000 hours in our architectural training program. And that's the reality. And if you underestimate it, you'll be underestimating. But having said that, next week, I will design how to create a high availability multi-cloud architecture, because that way I can focus on high availability principles, which will be much more straightforward to talk about how to do something that only 100 of us in the entire world would know how to create, like an Amazon entire cloud or something like that. But next Friday here on YouTube, I will definitely do how to create a multi-cloud architecture. And the reason I'm doing it is 98% of things are multi-cloud architecture. And I'll do something like that next Friday. So Chris, make sure you set up a architecture, like a 2-hour architecture live stream where I can just talk about the tech and not talk about the business behind it, because that could be, a couple hundred hours. Is the training for the GCP architect in YouTube to prepare and take for the exam? So absolutely. I already had someone yesterday tell us that they would finish our thing last Friday and already passed it on Monday this week. So the answer is yes. There is the free Google Professional Cloud Architect certification, and there is also this 550-page e-guide along with that I recommend that you also do. But the Google Professional Cloud Architect is a very straightforward certification in that they actually ask about a technology and the implications of technology. It's not like an AWS exam where it's hard to figure out what they're asking because it's full of jargon and full of services, and there's really no question they're asking. These are very straightforward questions. They're much more architecture. So you should be very good with that exam. That's some scary Florida thunder, if you can hear that. He worked for clients where architects were engineers and networking security. Also, the managers and directors in those companies are mixing engineering and architecture. Thoughts? Absolutely, Andy. So I can tell you many, many years ago, I got my first architect job. Well, it wasn't my first. It was my second. And it was a fairly large global company. I walked in the room, Andy, on the first day, and they said, Mike, just to let you know we hired you as a consulting solutions architect, but we want you to be a sales engineer instead. We just called you an architect so we can pay you more. And guess what? I walked out, had a real architect job at Comcast 2 days later as the principal architect. Now, I've also seen people that were given architect titles because your company didn't know what an architect or an engineer even was. They had honestly no idea. So I've also seen some of that. But if you go to any client, and when I say client, I mean company that understands, that has a real tech strategy. Somebody that has a real architecture organization, which is every Fortune 100 company, actually every Fortune 500 company. And if you go to a company like Cisco, IBM, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Barclays Bank, JP Morgan Chase Bank, Halion, Cisco, you're not even going to be allowed to touch the technology or get anything near it. So what it comes down to in the end of the day is that some companies view technology as strategic, and the companies that view technology as a strategy have serious architecture and planning teams. And you can see them, you can feel them. You can see those companies where you walk in and you go to their website, you have an experience, and it's like, wow, they're great at what they do. Their operations are good. You order something, it comes 24 hours later. You don't even know how it got to you, across 10 states and 3 different places along the way, charged your card and did all these things. Those companies have big architecture teams. And then there are some companies that basically have systems that are very old. They have no idea what they're doing. The systems are working against the employees. And those are the companies that have a job that they don't know. But yeah, I've seen all kinds of silly jobs that had all kinds of titles. I remember my first architect job, they called it a design engineer. And then a month later, they called it a technical architect. And then my next network architect job was actually a network architect job, and I had a principal architect job right after that. And I don't even know what to call that. That was more marketing and strategy. But the key is, in a real job, you will only be doing one. So don't worry about it. Be great at one of these companies, because any of the real companies that you work for, any of the companies that have any potential for career advancement, any of the people that can pay you anything or promote you, all know the difference. Chris, we go to the next one. AI impact on the cloud architect role. It creates so many more jobs for architects. So I want you to understand what architecture really is. And I think if you come to the webinar, it'll help. Architecture is, how do I enhance your business? Architecture is strategy consulting. So I want you to look at it this way. I now have a new technology that I can take to a business that'll reduce their operational expenditures, increase their output, which is their productivity, so they can do more with less. I now have a technology that can automate stuff. I can take repetitive tasks, for which case I had to hire people and no longer need to hire people. I can not have to worry about sick time and call outs and vacation time for certain things. I can have technology that works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I can then hire the best and the brightest people in the world, the architects, to figure out how that strategy and how that technology gives me a competitive advantage. AI just creates architecture jobs. And it kills engineering jobs because AI can code, AI can configure. So we have to understand the difference between engineering jobs. If I've got someone that has CCIE level knowledge in networking, and to me, that's always been my intro to networking. You can see my number. I do 7417 in the back. When I started networking, within 9 months, I was a CCIE. Within 3 months of the time I had when I had my first job, I knew enough about networking that I actually got to start to learn my job. And here's what I mean by learn my job. I got to go to meetings, and in the meetings they were like, well, if we use intermediate systems in a single area, that might scale better than an OSPF single area, but we can't really find people that know intermediate systems to intermediate systems, but we know lots of people that know SF. Okay, now how are we going to structure the backbone of this? Are we going to use tag switching, or we're going to use label switching, or we're going to use RSVP signaling? And in the CCIA, after that, I knew what they were, so I at least could think about where the strengths and weaknesses and the attributes are, which is where the real learning says. So all the work that architects do, evaluate trade-offs, can't be replaced by AI. All the work that sales reps do can't be replaced by AI. All the work that a CISO, which is a security architect, or a CIO, which is an enterprise architect, does can't be replaced by AI. The only thing that can be replaced by AI is task, not thinking, task. So how to code, done. How to write a Python script, done. How to write a Bash shell script, done. How to write a Linux script, done. There's no reason for people to do these things anymore. Now, how to have one superstar be able to create the right thing and work with AI to do what 30 other people did? Now that's another story. So AI just keeps creating architecture roles. It keeps creating strategist roles. It creates more of these executive roles. It hurts the person doing the doing role. So here's my strategy. Don't do the roles that AI does. Do the stuff that AI can't do, which is basically you and your humanities, to celebrate it. And for the people that want to be in tech and stay in a hands-on engineering role, they have to stay in the top 25%. That means training from the best, getting constant training, getting constant practice, and working to be better every day. But I recommend that for anybody anyway, because guess what? When you get better every day, you have no competition out there. Chris, let's bring in the next one. And please, if you've got some questions, bring them in. I do want to do anything I can to help in your career. I don't have a lot of time, so get them in now, but I do want to help. What are the skills I would recommend for someone who wants to become an IAM engineer? The first thing that I would recommend, and I love IAM, is to understand that for the most part, IAM engineering is never enough. So here's what I would want you to understand. If you understand security, you understand everything. If you only understand IAM, all you really know is determining who people are, what they're allowed to do, and keeping track of what they've done. So your security skills are going to be more valuable to you. In general, most people think of IAM people as sysadmins, because sysadmins do a lot of the work. Now, let's talk about IAM roles you could do. You could do an IAM architect role, or you could do an IAM engineering role. And in either case, you're going to have to learn certain things. So the first thing you're going to need to understand is what is IAM, and understand the types of IAM. So we have basically customer IAM that we would use with our clients outside. We have our own internal IAM systems. And then you have to understand how these things connect to each other, the way these IAM systems work. So not how to configure it in Active Directory, so to speak, but understanding what is the right kind. And then it's learning all the kinds of authentication that you could work with. So what are the ways we can authenticate someone? We could authenticate them with a username, a password, a passphrase, an iris scan, a retina scan, a fingerprint, a facial scan, a token, what have you. And you're going to have to understand each one of those options and all the various technologies and what they do and the trade-offs. I like to use the eye scan trade-off. So let's say we wanted to collect an eye scan. We could look at the scan of the eye, and we could look at the retina pattern, which is at the back of the eye. Now that means we've got to get the person very close to a scanner like this to scan the retina, which could be a problem, especially in like flu season. And it also means that the back of the retina contains medical information. For example, because I used to practice internal medicine, I can tell you that xanthomas, are yellow spots on the back of the retina, are indicative of high cholesterol. AV nicking or little problems with the blood vessels is indicative of high blood pressure. So when we use, we start taking scans of the the retina, we're actually collecting medical information, which now means we may need to secure it differently, ethically, no more legal requirements. But we could use the iris, but it's not as accurate. So these are the kind of things that we would do in IM. So you'd have to understand those systems. Then when it comes out, you'd have to understand the different types of rights management that are there and how you would do it. You'd have to understand the heavy differences between role-based access control, address-based control, and context-aware-based access control. Then you'd really need to learn the various ways AI interacts with these systems and how they could be used. And then you would also need to understand your logging, your monitoring, your SIEM systems, because at that point you have the knowledge of what you're actually doing. Because when it comes to a tech, I can have someone that can just click a box. But when it comes to an engineer, I need them to understand how to tune, how to optimize, where it's going to break, how it works. So that's going to be the step to really get it. I always recommend my intro to cybersecurity certification, which is my favorite, which is I teach to everyone, which is the CISSP, because that's going to look really good on you after you learn security and after you learn IM. But IM without understanding networking to a degree or network security to a degree, and not understanding application security and what goes into that, and not understanding secure development practices and things that go into that, and not understanding physical security, you're going to only understand part of the picture. So I would recommend diving deep, really understand some security things. You can get some security insights and intro level things on this channel. Chris, if you can provide the link for the CISM bootcamp, the CCSK bootcamp, and the CCSP bootcamp, that'll give you a little bit of knowledge on security. But I want you to get really deep. I want you to dive deep, because if you want to focus on just IAM, you're going to have to get deep. And yes, I just dropped those links because I think it might help Alvin along the way in the chat box for the CCSK, the CISM, and the CCSP. They're all free. How fun it's going to be for an enterprise architect with AI. We're already there. It's all kinds of great. We as enterprise architects are already looking at the processes of the businesses. We're re-architecting business processes, and we're seeing what we can turf to say agentic AI. We're then figuring out new ways that people can do things with AI to be more efficient at what they do and how they do it. It is an incredibly fun and an incredibly time. Now, Carla, I don't want you to think that AI is new. I've worked with AI since 2001. David Lithicum on our team has been working with AI since 1985, which is why he's the author of our AI architect program, not me, because I only have 20 years experience with it. But it is a very cool time for us as enterprise architects to be able to have new technologies that we can use to drive for transformation, to have new technologies that are cool, to be in a place that we're going to soon have robotics integrated with AI, and potentially even have robots that can clean our houses for us and help cook things for people maybe they couldn't walk or are slightly disabled or something. Maybe the robots can clean their houses and cook their food and even remind them of their medications. We're not that far away from a lot of really cool things, because when I was younger, these AI things were tough, not because AI didn't exist, but because we had CPUs with a processor core and we had GPUs that were basically nothing. You know, I was thinking the workstation that I have here that had 64 physical cores in it, you know, a couple of GPUs in it. And that's, you know, more than multiple data centers used to be. And we all have them in our houses, or some of us have them in our houses now for fun, cool toys. So, or experiments because we think it's cool. So if we think about how cool it's actually getting, yeah, this is an exciting time for enterprise architects, cloud architects, any of us that really are in a position to drive transformation with tech. This is very cool. Completely agree with you, Carlo. Does the CCIE infrastructure still worth the effort? What are your goals? So it depends. So I'm going to give you the as one of the first CCIEs, Ayub, I'm going to give you the good, bad, and the ugly of it. I will tell you that having CCIE skills or CCIE level skills is my perspective of the new employable version of a network engineer. Don't have a CCIE, your AI might be able to do the job. Because what we do as CCIEs is not really configure stuff. It's more of the thinking and the planning of what we do, the limitations and the protocols, what have you. So having CCIE level skills, definitely. Now, if your goal is to be a network engineer or your goal is to be a technical architect, not a solutions architect, and if your goal is to move into a principal engineering role or a consulting systems engineering role, the CCIE is absolutely great. I will tell you the CCIE will improve your networking for most people. To me, it was my intro to networking, and I learned after that. But for most people, it will boost you where you're at. But the CCIE does something different. So not that everybody calls it the Jack Welch 4 E's each day, but Ayub, I want you to understand how managers think. So Jack Welch had convinced the hiring world, and me and everybody included, that when you hire for these 4 things. Someone that has energy, someone that's really enthusiastic about the work, someone that's a competitor or has edge and really wants to climb to the top, and someone that can execute or get things done. And when I deal with the biggest certifications, the CCIE, the CCD, to some degree, the CISSP, CCSP, CISM, what have you, what we're doing is we're proving to the world that you're smart, because most people couldn't pass that unless they were very smart. It's a very tough test. We're also proving your energy, enthusiasm, and passion, because who else is going to spend 1,000+ hours preparing for an exam unless they're enthusiastic and passionate about it? Now, it proves your competitiveness, because this exam is hard. And it was tough to get through it, probably tougher than 1 or 2 of my master's degrees were. So it's tough to get through it. So it shows that you can get stuff done, you can execute. So it's those reasons that the CCIE is good, because when I'm hiring, I want someone with a great attitude, energy, enthusiasm, passion, and smart. Because at a person that's smart and wants to work and is capable, if it's not networking and now it's security, it's no big deal to pick up a few things because they're a learner. Their fundamentals are good, they're strong. And you'll always have good fundamentals. In fact, I can tell you, because I started with the CCIE, and after that, I designed many of the internet service provider networks you deal with throughout the world, consulted every country you can think of, from the Middle East, Europe, Asia, South America, and building their internet systems out. I got to learn a lot of things along the way. Designed voice system, video systems, Middle East. I did it everywhere. And it was all evaluating trade-off. It was all understanding clients' needs. It was all understanding wacky rules and regulations and their impact on the architecture and all that stuff. The CCIE was really good for me. So it was great there. Now, Ayub, at some point in my career, I moved into a chief architect role where I was really an executive. Now, at that point, I was asked to remove the CCIE off of my business card, as well as my CISSP, and put my MBA on it instead. So it all depends on where you're going and what your goals are. If your goals are engineering, it's the greatest thing you can do. If your goal is a top 10 certification that will make you stand out and get more interviews at all the best companies in the world, it's still going to be great. But is the juice worth the squeeze? It depends on what your goals are. For architecture, probably not. I'd invest time in an MBA. For engineering, especially networking engineering, I would definitely do the CCIE all day long. And I've trained many people for it and recommended it to so many for engineering. What a great question. Which high-value AWS architect certification? So, Varesh, there's no such thing as a high-value AWS certification. These are certifications that are the name of something and how to configure it. Of them, which will not teach you anything about the job, but after you know the job, they will help you get your interviews, are the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, the Azure Solutions Architect Expert, and the Google Professional Cloud Architect. Any one of those 3 are good. But I'd probably recommend AWS or Azure. I would look at where your market is and see which is bigger. For example, if you're in the Caribbean, Azure is bigger than AWS. If you're in some parts of the world, AWS is bigger. So that's what I would do, but it really doesn't matter. What is the career path for a broadcast engineer to become a cloud architect? Go to cloud architect school and learn. The same as it would be for you to go become a physician, and the same as it would be for you to become an attorney. Now, I can say this, my old job was, and I'll tell you, in some cases, broadcast engineers will have some experience that'll be helpful. But my last job was practicing internal medicine. I was a nurse practitioner, and my next job was a senior engineer and then lead architect within 3 months. So the key is it's your skills, it's not your job. Now, the good news as a broadcast engineer in today's world, you may know something about IP and networking because you might be doing some encoder-based work. You might have some experience with IP multicast. You potentially have a little bit of experience with quality of service. And depending upon what you were doing as a broadcast engineer, you may have some other information. Now, there are broadcast engineers that operate the machinery, and there are broadcast engineers that are going to scope the environment before they get there, understand where they're broadcasting from, understanding what medias they have, whether it's internet or satellite or what have you, that are then in charge with determining what kind of encoders based upon what kind of bandwidth and what kind of all the technology is underlying. That is some pretty heavy science. Like I have a friend, Douglas, that has broadcast engineering background and live experience, and he has a lot of networking balance. I think even as a Cisco CCNP with it, but we also work with him from an architecture perspective. But that's the key. The key is being trained for the job. I come from medicine. And when I went into tech, the way people approach their tech careers seemed absolutely crazy to me. And I'll explain the reason. And the reason it felt crazy is because where I came from. Where I come from, LinkedIn user, you have to learn all the skills before you're allowed to start your job. I went to school for 7 years. Now, that meant approximately 1,500 hours in classes, which meant 4,500 hours of study time. In addition to that, I had about 3,500 hours of clinical hours and clinical rotations. So by the time I was done school and I had my first internal medicine job as a nurse practitioner, I was already there doing the same things as anybody else would have done with 50 years experience. Same as any pilot. Now, when I came to tech, people said, Mike, you don't need to do what you're doing. Just get any help desk job and you'll learn on the job. Now, the reality is, why would anybody pay you to do a job that you don't have to do? And the answer is they didn't, which is why so many people had a hard time getting entry-level jobs. And what they learned in the entry-level jobs was how to be entry-level. And most people could never get out of the entry-level jobs because what they learned on the entry-level jobs was how to be entry-level. And then the only way they could go from an entry-level job to another job was take the training they should have had to get to their end job. So I'm a big believer, if you want to be a pilot, go to flight school. Don't go become a lawyer first, a physician second, a circus performer. Just go to be the job you want. It's what I did. And I've seen it, whether it was Pierre, who was in California, a sailboat operator who got hired at LeaseWeb, whether it was Noah, who was a social worker who was hired at a head, whether it was Vladimir, who was a 24-year-old college student that got his first job at North Highland as a solutions architect, whether it's Michael A., who just got hired as a security architect in England, or Emmanuel, who just got hired as a security architect in England, or Nafuli, who got his first tech job as a chief technology officer, or Al, who just got his first tech job after we trained him at Deloitte as a senior solutions architect as his first role, and now took a director level role 2 years later. So it's all about what you train. So the path for a broadcast engineer to be a cloud architect is learn to be a cloud architect. Because if you learn to be a cloud engineer, and I've worked with lots of cloud engineers, for example, even after 10 years of experience, they know how to be a cloud engineer. It takes the same time to turn a cloud engineer as an architect as it would, say, a nurse, because the jobs are so different. So that's why I always say, want to be an expert at your job? Go to school for your job. Train everything for your job. Read everything, and don't learn anything about anybody else's job, because it doesn't help you, which is why I only know architecture, for example. And be doing so, I was able to rise to the top because I was an expert architect, not a hobbyist programmer, a hobbyist DevOps engineer, a hobbyist Linux person, a hobbyist networking person. All I know is architecture. And because of that, I was a principal architect in 2 years, and I was a chief architect with a couple of years experience. And you can too, as long as you focus it. So I hope that helps. If you want to know more, why don't you join me on the webinar on Thursday, and I'll talk about how to become an architect. I'll talk about every skill you need. I'll talk about how to bypass HR, how to stand out, all of it, and it's completely free. Chris, drop the link to that in the chat box, and drop a link to the guide on how to become a cloud architect. It's also in the guide box. It's also free, Chris, so drop that in the chat box too. Is there any training marrying architects to business? So that's exactly what our program is about. It is teaching people how to do the architecture, which starts with the executives understanding the business goals, understanding the business needs, how to design the strategy, how to present it back to them, how to sell it to them, how to create the governance structure and all of it. That's exactly what we do. And the reason I had to create that is there really is nothing out there. And, you know, why is there nothing out there? Because the only people of those of us that are working in these big roles, here's how we learned architecture. We got MBAs. We took leadership training after that. We learned executive training after that. Some of us had a tech background. Some of us didn't. And we figured it out along the way. And I can tell you, you know what really helped me? So I had my MBA. I had a master's degree in healthcare, which I also used. I had a CCIE. I worked in these roles for a long time. And then I got hired as an executive architect, and they made me do strategy and management consulting for about a year. So that was approaching things from a McKinsey mindset, you know, generating mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive hypotheses, learning how to answer the right questions. And I'll tell you, that helped me. So I created our own because there's nothing out there. But the closest thing out there is management and strategy consulting training that you would actually get if you went to a McKinsey or a Deloitte or an Accenture straight out of an MBA program. And that's kind of what I created, but I also created that with architecture. But that's how we've typically learned it. That's where most of our architects originally came from, because we're the only people that make training on that. And that's what our cloud architect career development programs are. I'll talk to you more if you want tomorrow in the webinar, how to become an architect. And honestly, if you come to that webinar on how to become an architect, if you've got a question outside of our training program about architecture careers, I'm still happy to speak live about it. I don't really care. I just want to help. Are there practice questions for the GCP architect? Any basics around network topics to prepare for? So anything that's in that exam, for the most part, I covered it and I went a lot deeper. Now, should you get a practice test? Probably. I would. Who makes a great practice test for Google? I'm not really sure. Here's the way I literally approached the Google Professional Cloud Architect exam when I took it. Now, my situation is different. I helped design a lot of the clouds that exist today many years ago, so I knew what all the clouds were. I consulted to hundreds of organizations, and I picked up, there was a book, and I can recommend the book. It could be a good helper in addition to ours, and it's completely free. I don't get paid for commissions or anything, but I like this book. I read, as someone that knew cloud computing and knew data centers, the only cloud many years ago I never worked on was the Google Cloud. So I bought this book. This was the professional study guide. Read this book 2 days later to pass the exam, and it was so straightforward. So it's not like an AWS exam where it's all about jargon. In many cases, they're going to expect you to know something and answering it based on you know something. So I went way above and beyond that course. So, you know, take that 2-week course. I think you'll be pretty prepared. You know, there's a 500-page study guide that's completely free. I would get it. You could read this book, get a practice test, but I don't think you'll have a hard time with this exam if you take our training. It's pretty comprehensive what we put in there. Very. What are the daily activities of a cloud architect in real time? At what time will he handle one or more cloud projects? Real difference between a cloud architect. So here's the reality. You might be on a single cloud project with a team of 50 for the next 2 years. If you are a junior level architect and you're not put on any real issues, you could touch startup 1, startup 2, startup 3. So what will your day look like for any cloud architect? It's going to look like you're going to wake up. You're going to check your email. There's typically going to be some documentation you write for 1 to 2 hours. There's typically some research you're going to do behind your computers for 1 to 2 hours. There's typically a presentation that you'll do, or 2 presentations for 1 to 2 hours of your day. And the rest of the time will be facilitating meetings, leading meetings, and traveling to clients. You might be taking clients to lunches, dinners, and drinks. That's the real architect. Now, the difference between a cloud architect and a technical architect is very specific. A cloud architect designs to enhance the business's performance. and it's a much less technical position. The reason that the technical architect pays so little and the reason the technical architect doesn't get advanced is the technical architect focuses exclusively on the technology. So what'll happen is the C-suite will want to do something, the enterprise architects, the cloud architects will collaborate on the strategy, and then the cloud architects are going to ultimately go to other architects between them, and those architects are going to go to the technical architect. So the technical architect is going to be a support staff for the architect. So they're going to be a design engineer. They're not going to act like an architect. They're not going to think like an architect. They're not going to get paid like an architect. And I was one. And I'm going to tell you, they get paid about a third of an executive architect because they focus on the tech, not the transformation. But if your goal is to just focus on a tech, and that's what you're going to do. Now, in a technical architect role, you're going to be writing a lot more technical documentation. You're going to be feeding into product requirements on little features that they need to create for the solutions architects or cloud architects to be able to sell it. You're going to be working with engineers and providing technical coaching as a technical architect. So as a technical architect, you're going to have to be better than the engineers. As a cloud architect, you won't be as good at the engineers as the technology. So there is a big difference. So, and as a technical architect, you'll be writing technical documentation, technical literature, art, technical anything. And again, it's going to be facilitating meetings, participating meetings, and the such. So you're probably still not going to touch the tech as a technical architect unless you're doing a proof of concept and the cloud architect or solutions architect leading it, and the technical architect is there with the engineers. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. That's the major difference. Do you focus on making the organization better? Or do you focus on a tool? So the technical architect would focus on the iPhone. The enterprise architect and cloud architect would focus on what's the entire strategy we can do to get you better. And the technical architect will focus on the phone itself and the design of the phone itself. Well, we focus on the rest of it. But we need people to focus on the phone. So every job is important. Keep that in the back of your mind. What are the fundamental skill set for a cloud architect? Well, the fundamental skill sets are as following. Business acumen. And there's a guide we put, because if you don't have business, you can't do anything. They are sales skills, because you have to sell on the job. They are presentation skills. They are leadership skills. They are executive presence. They are emotional intelligence. They are such. On the technical side, they are network design skills. They are data center design skills. They are cloud design skills. They are application design skills. They are security design skills. They are AI design skills. So it's that. So how do you design something? You learn how the systems work and how they fit together. So they're the components. But there's a guide that you can look there, and I'm having a complete and total webinar where I'm going to cover every skill in depth. Why engineers always think strategic people are useless, and why do they they think they invented everything? Okay, so let's really talk about this. So Andy, when I owned a restaurant, my family owned a restaurant. So the first shift people always thought the night shift people were lazy, and the second shift people often thought the first shift people left stuff all over and messy. Now, years later, when I practiced internal medicine and I was a nurse practitioner, the nurses thought the nurse practitioners were stupid. The nurse practitioners couldn't understand why the nurses didn't know anything. And so it goes in every career. You got lots of smart people and lots of it. So Andy, what's really going on? And here's the reason that engineers often don't like architects is what the engineers have done. And I love engineers. They focused on becoming experts at the tech. They're the people that build it. They're the people that tune it. These are people, they're some of the smartest people you'll ever met. These are great people. Unfortunately, as they focused on these tech skills and more tech skills and tech skills, and we need these people, we do. They focused on the skills that were worth $80,000 a year or $90,000 a year or $100,000 a year. And meanwhile, business acumen skills are worth $500,000 a year. So now you've got a cloud architect or an enterprise architect that knows 1/10 about the technology that the engineer does, but they're selling $100 million at a time. They're leading large teams of people and delivering big results. They're giving presentations, and that's driving $500 million of future revenue coming into the company. And they're designing a strategy that made sales more efficient, which brought in an extra $4 billion. So, but see, the architect, if they're crazy, and they're not, they think the tech isn't important because it's all about strategy, and that's what they focus on. And the engineers think the silly presentation, this person focused on which suit to wear for this presentation. Why did this person focus on which words to say at this exact presentation? Because that's what the architect has to do, because the architect is a strategist that may need to shift an industry in one direction. And the problem is people don't understand people that are different than them. And they think different than them is not good, not smart, I don't like this. When the reality is we need absolutely everyone in this world. If the doctor builds a plan and there's no nurse to carry out the plan, the patient's going to die. If the architect designs a strategy and the engineer doesn't build it, it's a strategy, it's a blueprint that goes nowhere. So we always need both. But it's really sad. People don't understand people. You've got, for any reason, they can find a reason to conflict. But it is really hard when you work really hard and you learn a lot. And you notice the people that are dressing better and polishing their shoes better are getting paid more and promoted more than you are. But that's usually the reason. Great question. Chris, bring in the next one. Out of all DevOps tools, which is highly likely to use? So Varesh, I am an architect. And as an architect, I have absolutely never worked in DevOps in my entire life. Now, Kubernetes is not a DevOps tool. Kubernetes is a container orchestration tool, which is used for a compute option. Remember, you always have 4 compute options in cloud computing. Your virtual machine, your container, which needs an orchestration strategy, your function as a service, and your application virtualization. So that's part of it. But for the rest of these tools, whatever they want to use, Jenkins, Spinnaker, who knows, whatever, that's up to the DevOps engineers. I am not an engineer. Now, Sandeep Das focuses on engineering. He's got a nice YouTube channel. He always talks about DevOps concepts, and I can recommend looking at that. But architecture and DevOps, now, integration of architecture and DevOps is one thing, but architecture and DevOps are kind of like the airplane pilot and the flight attendant. They're both on the plane, but their jobs are so very different, it really doesn't matter. So I recommend Sandeep Das for that. Now, there's a difference between integration with DevOps teams, which I think there was a question which I can talk about later. Yuri, could you provide a brief overview of the difference between a cloud architect and solutions architect? You know, Yuri, I can. And why don't I actually map this stuff out for you? And I may have drawn one initially. Let me see if I have, and if not, I'll draw one live for you. And because I really want you to understand, the difference in the various architecture roles and where we fit. And when I show you this, you'll be able to see, why some architects get paid so much more than other architects, and why the solutions architect role is truly a junior entry-level role, and why we've gotten so many people that role as their first job. So bear with me. Let me fix this, you can see it. So if we look at this diagram that Alonzo and I drew over here, I want you to understand the way these organizations typically work. So at the top of an organization, you're going to have the chief information officer. Now, this chief information officer is an architect. They are a IT architect, and they are responsible for both the organization's technology strategy as well as the IT organization's operations. So that means what will report to the CIO will typically be a VP of IT that manage the engineers that do their jobs. And there'll also be an enterprise architect, a chief technology officer, or a chief architect, depending upon the organization. All those roles are all enterprise architect. Now, the enterprise architect is going to be responsible for everything that makes the organization work, meaning what's the best way for employees to do their jobs? What are the tools that employees need to do their jobs best? And what is the strategic blueprint that we're going to take to get there? So This role over here, and which is a very high paying role, you can see these roles pay up to $800,000-$900,000 if they're chief architect roles. Otherwise, they're typically about $250,000 a year. So this role itself is an executive here. Now, when we go one level down, we now have the cloud architect. Now, understand that everybody is multi-cloud. It's not like an AWS exam or an Azure exam. 98% of customers are multi-cloud. And that means for normal customers, a data center or two in a private cloud like Nutanix, OpenStack, or VMware, AWS, Azure, some co-location providers, some SaaS providers. That's reality. So the cloud architect is typically responsible for all this stuff. So this is a 75% business role, 25% tech role. This is an 80 to 90% business role. Now, as a cloud architect, you're going to be responsible for the design across the network, the data centers, and all your clouds. So again, this is going to be a big position. Now, the cloud architect themselves, because they're focusing on 3 or 4 different clouds, and everything, the organization's security comes onto them, their networking comes up to them, their applications, their IAM, their AI, they're typically going to have 2 sets of people working underneath them. They're going to have specialty architects like network architects and security architects. And we're also going to be dealing with solutions architects. Now, if we're a cloud architect, chances are AWS, Azure, and Google are going to try and come sell us stuff. So their solutions architects, as the rule, work for a vendor, and they're always pre-sales. If they're not, they're typically cloud architects. AWS is weird names they name their people, but this is for every other organization in the world. So if I'm a cloud architect, I'm going to bring in the sales reps and the solutions architect from AWS, Microsoft, and Google, and they're going to provide me insight and guidance into their stuff. Now, at the same time, I'm going to have a network architect, and they're going to and now they need something. They're doing a network design. They might contact the solutions architects from Juniper Networks and Cisco Networks. Or now I have a security architect that wants to design a new demilitarized zone. And that security architect says, well, Checkpoint's got a viable solution. Let's check that out. Palo Alto's got a viable solution. FortiGate's got a viable solution. Cisco, let's bring in their solutions architects. So solutions architects, 90% of the time, are pre-sales. They design, present, and sell to an upper level architect like a cloud architect or an enterprise architect. Now, I train people to be a cloud architect because any cloud architect can easily take a solutions architect role because they know all this stuff. The problem is when people only train for a single cloud and they don't know a cloud like a solutions architect, if they don't get hired by AWS as a solutions architect, there's no reason for anybody to hire them because everybody else needs a cloud architect. So that's why I train cloud architects, because cloud architects can easily get solutions architect jobs, but solutions architects typically need a lot of training to get a cloud architecture, which often pays more anyway. So that's why I train for cloud architects, and because people can get hired either way. I hope that helps, because that really is the major difference. Chris, when you have a chance, bring in the next one. How all guys crack international jobs for cloud architects and any startups? Players some common questions and answers guides, which is frequently asked on interviews. So, Paresh, I actually have about 80 interview questions that are on this YouTube video, on this YouTube channel, of very common questions we ask and answers that will actually get you hired. But at the end of the day, you can't fake your way through an architecture interview. And people try all day long. And I'm going to tell you about, out of every 1,000 interviews I do as an architect, trying to hire an architect, maybe, if I'm lucky, one person can pass the interview. So let me give you an example of how easy it is to see the difference between someone that knows how to versus who can design. And the biggest problem people make when they do their architecture job is they don't do any architecture work. They do hands-on engineering. So Varesh, let me ask you this, and this is a very entry-level question that I'll do, and I know you won't be able to, I don't expect you to answer it, but I might ask someone, could you tell me the components in the IP header and how those components could be used to secure an enterprise? Now, the reason I'm going to ask this is, first, if the person doesn't know what's in an IP header, they probably have no idea how to secure it. They probably have no idea how to do networking or anything that's component in networking, because they don't have networking fundamentals, which means no networking, no cloud architecture, it falls apart, no security architecture, no network architecture. It's an instant question to see. So It's very easy for me to ask a question to see if someone knows, and that's what we do. Could you tell me how one host communicates to another host on a network? If you can't design any architecture without knowing how the communication occurs. But I can tell you, all the people that have done the how-to labs will never know, because this is something you actually have to learn. You have to understand. Architecture is conceptual, how the technology, where it works, where it fits in. But there's about 80 to 100 questions on technical architecture questions on this channel for cloud architect jobs. On top of that, there's a video of David Lithicum and I doing some architecture questions together. There's Alonzo and I doing lots of architecture. So there is a whole lot, at least 20 to 30 videos on this. And Chris will send an interview playlist to you. Said he already did. And Mike, if I were to suggest 1 certifications rather than 10 certifications on AWS, which would it be? So Rohit, there's 2 sides. So if anybody came to me with all 10 AWS certifications, I would immediately say, thank you for coming, but I can't hire you. And here's the reason why. Each one of these AWS certifications is in somebody else's different career. Now, I can tell you that my favorite of the certifications is going to be, there's only 2 that I think value of any AWS certifications. For DevOps engineer, the AWS DevOps professional is quite good, not for architects, but for engineers. The DevOps professional actually gets some good industry recognition. For solutions architects or cloud architects, I would recommend the AWS Solutions Architect Professional. Now, here's why. I want you to understand, Rohit, and I know you, that those AWS Solutions Architect Professional is 5% of what you need for the job, and we're going to teach you the other 95% of what you need to be good. But imagine if instead of learning the 5% from AWS, you learned 1% of 10 different people's careers. At the end of the day, what we're actually talking about is at the end of the day, you'll be not as good as AI in any one thing. So for cloud architects, the certifications that I generally recommend are as follows: the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, the TOGAF 10, which is an architecture framework. It won't teach you how to be an architect, but it's a great framework. And then the CISSP, which is my intro level to security. So those are the types of things that I would need you to think of. Jericho, you watched David Lithicum's recent YouTube video about cloud architects in 2025 and 26, and he mentioned that we need to align closely with application architecture and DevOps. Absolutely. So your question is cloud architecture, you understand how to implement DevOps tools? No. So yeah, I think you're taking David's video differently, and David and I talk almost every day. He's one of our instructors. He's the chief instructor of, of our AI program. What he's really saying is, for anything to work and for architectures to be nimble in the future, what we really need to focus on is the business needs. And the business needs drive the applications. And the applications itself determine what we're going to need infrastructure-wise to support those applications. So what he's really saying is the future to make this more innovative is understand how the organization works. Understand the way they need to work, understand the organizational strategy, understand the workflow behind the applications, and then understand how your DevOps teams work and what your DevOps teams need and the inefficiencies or operational inefficiencies in DevOps teams, so that you can work with DevOps leaders to create a new strategy and a new process for things to be done. Not for you to become a DevOps engineer, but you're a strategist, a good strategist for real, speaks to the application people, speaks to the business, speaks to the security people, speaks to the DevOps people, speaks to the AI people. So that's really where he's coming from. And I agree with him. You do have to know what goes on in other departments, but knowing which tools they use, that's not our job. But you have to understand how they work. For example, I may understand an application release process, but I don't know how to code because I'm an architect. So how do you get to the business? How do you understand what the business really needs? What does that sales rep need? And does that application support them or not? So yes. And then having better relationships with the development teams, the development AI, as well as the DevOps teams, yes, to make sure that your process is not theirs. And that's why you're going to have to collaborate with them every single time. But that is not the same as learning how to do DevOps as a technician. This is more about planning and strategy, which you don't learn by doing. You learn by studying strategy. Great question there, Jericho. Excellent, really. After you complete your enterprise architecture certification, what certifications should you have on your CV? The AWS Solutions Architect Professional, the TOGAF 10, and the CISSP, Bruno, are our recommendations. Architecture equal diagrams, blueprints, strategy. Engineering equal operations, turn, key cycle on, watch LEDs blink. So architecture is, I don't want to say that's a good assessment. What you can think of architecture is as planning and strategy. So if you're going to design a building, you need the planning and strategy. Now, after me as an architect designs a building, let's say I design a skyscraper and I design the pools, I design the golf courses, and I determine what it's going to look like. Now, we still need the people in the building to make sure that it's not going to fall down. So we typically bring in structural engineers or engineers, and real engineers are involved in planning. They are involved in optimization. They can see the breaking points and what they are. They tune, and they help the strategist better plan. Now, operations, that is the people that do the day in and day out tasks. Patch the operating systems, look on a screen to see if something break and blink, and that do technician-oriented things and break fix. But that's really more of what it is. But architecture could be documents that are 500 pages long. They could be presentations, and they can talk about it. So I can put that into context. So I kind of hope that helps. Andy, how to approach companies that are stuck or married to a particular vendor? It doesn't matter if the vendor is Azure, Cisco, whatever. So, Andy, when it comes down to it, we have to understand the organization's real need. And let's say I'm using Cisco gear because Cisco's been good to me. Cisco's given me great support. I trust them. I know them, and Cisco has a big relationship with me. To get Cisco out of there, you're going to have to do something that's far better than Cisco. Now, here's where it gets easy. And at one point, I competed against Cisco, and then I competed at Cisco. Now, I want you to understand the logic behind this. So prior to Cisco, Andy, I worked at a company called Riverstone Networks. Riverstone Networks at the time had one of the best layer 3 switches in the world. And from what I could tell, had some of the scariest, most smartest engineers I've ever seen. At the same time, we would compete against Cisco. Now, Cisco did not compete the way we did. They brought in smart engineers, but what Cisco brought in was business strategists. They'd spend a tremendous amount of time and effort with their clients. And everything related to that. They would solve problems fast, and Cisco developed a strategic relationship. No matter how hard it would work, Andy, when I'd compete against Cisco, the chief information would say this to me. And here's the reality. And I want you to understand this. If I go with you, Mike, and I like you, Mike, and your box is better, what happens when you're not there, or the box breaks, or the company goes bankrupt, or any of this? Or when the system fails because of a weird bug, I'm going to get fired. Now, if I buy Cisco or I buy Microsoft, nobody's going to fire me because I'm dealing with a number one or the number two player. So one thing, Andy, is try to work at a number one, number two player, and that's why when Jack Welch was the CEO of GE, if the product was the number one or the number two in the industry, he kept it, and if not, he sold it off because it's really hard to sell a product that's not the top. Now, at the end of the day, realistically speaking, and yes, I know the question, I'll answer it. And at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is understanding the business client's goals, understand the business client's needs, and creating a better blueprint or a better strategy than the other organization. It takes investing serious time. So, for example, I had worked with a bank one day, and the bank had a very, very established, 100-year relationship with a various telecommunications vendor. And now all of a sudden, I'm at Cisco. This particular client talked about why they didn't want to use Cisco phones at a previous time. And here's what I did. Andy, when the rest of the sales engineers went to the office each day, I went to the customer client every single day. I took the client to lunch every day. I took the client to dinner there. I actually functioned as almost as ancillary staff, asking questions and helping. 6 months later, I had such a relationship. I had influenced the RFP in the direction of what would be best for the client, and it ended up being what was best for us, and we won the deal. So build a better mousetrap, build a better business case, build a better relationship. Sometimes realize you're just going to lose them, and sometimes you can win them, but that's typically speaking why. Hope that answers your question. And as quickly as I could do in a YouTube video. I don't have a lot of time, so if you've got questions, please get them in, and I'll do the best I can to answer them. An implementation within any cloud versus AI implementation with premise, which cost-effective, highly secure? So, Varesh, it all depends. Generally speaking, if you have a high throughput application, it's much cheaper in a private cloud or a data center. But cloud computing is much more agile. If it's event driven, it might be cheaper on the cloud. So this again could take a 6 to 12 months analysis of understanding the organization, understanding the technology needs, understanding the optimal technology for it, and understanding where that technology will perform best. Because there are some cases right now, you can go to Dell and you can buy a server with about 384 cores and about 8 terabytes of DRAM for about 300 grand. And run that thing on a cloud provider, and you're spending about $4 million in the course of 3 years. So it doesn't make sense to run a server like that on the cloud computing environment. But I might have this event-driven thing that might make sense to do in the cloud. Or maybe I start my AI thing in the cloud, train it on the cloud where I have access to on-demand GPUs, and then bring my model back to my data center where I can run a compute. So it takes a lot of analysis to figure this out, and that's why I spent about 1,000 hours training people to get to the point where they're ready to be hired, and then they can get better for the rest of their lives. But too much to answer in a YouTube video. But if we had a couple of weeks full-time, we could start talking about that, and that's why I have a Cloud Architect program to really spend that kind of depth in it. Chris, we can go to the next one. Please answer the question related to the header. So, Yasel, here's why I asked that question. So if a person knows the header of an IP packet has, say, a source address, a destination address, a protocol, a type of service, and a few other things, what does that tell me? So I know that IP header tells me who's sending the traffic and to whom. So how could I use that, and what are the implications on security? Well, an access list, for example, will look at the things that are in a header. And therefore, based upon what's in the IP header, I could create an access list. Now, a firewall would also look at the IP header, and that therefore we could filter based upon an access list. Now, remember I mentioned there was a type of service bit? So what we could do in a high security environment is we could set the type of service bit to critical, and then we could create the network in our private cloud to recognize that type of service bit. And we could use that to prioritize mission critical traffic over, say, worm or virus traffic to make sure that even if we were in a DDoS attack, our critical traffic would get through. Now, because we have in the header the source address, destination address protocol, We can do what's called traffic shaping or traffic policing, where if we're getting a certain amount of traffic coming in from a certain protocol and it doesn't make sense, we could choose to drop it or rate limit it to a certain thing. Now, when we look at the IP header, that provides a lot of information. So for example, let's say someone tries to log in into an IAM system. The IAM system, specifically in a context-aware IAM system, might look at things like your IP address or where you're supposed to be, and that's also contained in the header. Now, our logs, for example, that are coming out of it are also going to have the source address and destination address. So now our SIEM systems, which and source systems, which could also be that can also be AI-based, can now look at some of the information in the headers and the IP addresses and kind of detect and correlate text. So these are just a couple of the things that you would do if you understand what's in the IP header. And that's why I use basic questions like this, because if the person tells me that what's in the header and they know the ACL and the firewall, and they know a little bit, but at least they have some fundamentals. Now, if they can start getting into the type of service and rate limiting and traffic shaping and queuing, now I know they're real good. Now, if they can start looking at that and then thinking about AI adaptive technology and how a next generation firewall would use the header, or how an intrusion detection prevention system would use the header. And then we can even think of, for example, because the IP header has a source and destination address, that actually tells users who's speaking to whom. So, for example, in TLS security, like what you use for HTTPS, it doesn't actually encrypt the header. It only encrypts the payload. So you and I might be speaking, and people could see you and I were speaking. They just wouldn't see what we're speaking about. But if we used IPsec, where we in a tunnel mode, where we packaged the header and encrypted the header, therefore no one could see whom was speaking with whom and the such. So that's kind of the sample why I ask these questions, because each time the person can peel back and give me an answer, I know exactly how strong their fundamentals are and exactly how good they are at solving problems. What do I think about DevOps for years to come? I would recommend getting out of DevOps engineering, because I see about 50% of those jobs being replaced by AI. So if you want to be in DevOps, you got to be in the top 25%. I recommend going to things that can't be done by AI, like solutions architecture, cloud architecture, sales engineering, principal architects, principal engineers, distinguished architects, distinguished engineers, leaders, those types of jobs. But I wouldn't be moving to DevOps. But unless you love it, and if you love it, be the best. Dreams T, AWS or Azure? Well, Honda or Toyota, Mercedes or BMW, Chevy versus Ford. It's the same thing. Now, I want you to all understand that every cloud in the entire world is built the same way, and they all just have a bunch of servers, a bunch of switches, a bunch of stores in there, and then they add a little of their own software, which is basically the difference, and then they all sell you virtual data center services. So, do you like a Honda? Do you like a Toyota? I'll tell you, I had a Honda. My wife has a Toyota. I like her Toyota better. It seems to feel better for me. Now, I drove a BMW and I drove a Mercedes, and I bought the Mercedes because it was soft and squishy on my back. The BMW was a beautiful car, but it hurt my back. So it's personal choice which one you use. But the reality is it's all the same. So don't worry which cloud to learn. Learn the cloud. Because what if you got certified and only knew how to drive a Toyota? And now you got a new job as a bus driver and you had to drive a Volvo bus. You'd be done, right? But if you learn how to drive the car, you're good. If you know what a virtual machine is, you know what an EC2 instance is, an Azure virtual machine, a Google Compute instance virtual machine, an Oracle virtual machine, a VMware virtual machine, a KVM virtual machine. In every cloud and every data center, you're good. Learn EC2 and don't even know what it is, you're not good anywhere. So just learn the cloud, and you'll be in totally great shape anywhere you want to work. Great question, Dreams too. Like I advised in a video, to start with the CCNA, CISSP before becoming a cloud architect. Is that really necessary for a person aspiring to be a cloud architect? Because your list is some daunting. So Rohit, if you look now, our recommendations are the AWS Solutions Architect Professional. We've swapped out the CCNA with the TOGAF 10, and as well as the CISSP for security. I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend you do them. And that's why we provide the training for the program, because at the end of the day, how do you want to stand out? First, you have to have the skills, and we're going to train you for the skills, but how do you stand out? Now, Rohit, if you've got 10 years experience, then we don't need to worry about it. But in a world that's competitive, In a world where companies are laying off, I can get you hired like nothing, but I got to make you stand out. So I always recommend top 10% everything. So, there's part of that. But, as part of your program, as you go through, there'll be certain things for you to do along the way. You'll have the opportunity to do the questions, but please understand that is my recommendations. I train you to be the best. I give you access to the best training in the world. And then I want you to get the best credentials in the world, which we provide training for. And then I want you to polish up. I want you to follow our program to really optimize your resume, optimize your social media. And I want you to use our interview training program and then even our salary negotiation training because I want the best for you. So that's why I highly recommend doing what we do. So go through the content, quickly, but and figure out what you do. But I made those recommendations for a reason, and I really would like you to do that. What do you think makes you more realistic off of layoffs and the best skill to work on? So, Jose, you never need to get laid off. Let me give you the skills on how to never get laid off. Be in the top 25% of the employees at any company, and you'll almost never be laid off. Not almost, but not never. For example, I survived over 21 layoffs, but I was always fought to be in the top 25%. Now, which positions get laid off and which positions can't be laid off? That's the bigger question, Jose. So, let's look at jobs that can't be laid off. I can't lose anybody related to sales because if money doesn't come in, company goes bankrupt. So as long as the people in sales are good at their job, account managers are safe, solutions architects are safe, sales engineers are safe. Any of those people are always safe because they bring in money. Senior leadership, as long as the company is doing well, is safe. First line managers, if they're good, are usually safe. Mid-level managers can be chopped. HR and recruiting people can be chopped like nothing. And back-end engineering gets crushed. And the reason back-end engineering gets crushed, Jose, is for the following reasons. I need my solutions architect in New York to go close that $100 million of business. That's a sales position. And the last people I get rid of are people that bring in money. But the back-end engineering, let's say I have some software that needs to be developed. I have a choice of hiring someone in San Jose, California, or San Francisco, where I need to pay them $400,000 or $500,000 a year to not be at poverty level because the average 2-bedroom home they would live in is about $1.5 million there. So they need an incredible amount of money to live. Now, at the same time, I could hire that person in Chicago, which is a high cost of living area, but I could hire them in Cameroon. I could hire them in Cape Town. I could hire them in Cambodia. I can hire them in Kiev. So the software development doesn't matter where you're at, which is why you'll typically see a company do a massive layoff and they'll hire more solutions architects, more sales reps, more sales engineers, get rid of 10,000 software developers, and then hire them overseas. So the way you stay safe is you get out of jobs that AI can do and you get out of jobs that can be outsourced. Because you can't outsource sales. You can't outsource senior leadership. You can't outsource architecture. They're person to person. But you can outsource back-end engineering. So that's typically how you do it. You put yourself in a place where you're creating money, you're creating revenue, and you're almost always good. If you want to be in a revenue costing position, Jose, I want you to understand what goes on in companies. Every company stack ranks their employees from best to worst. And every team stack ranks their team. So it's like picking a team. Who do you cut from your team? You cut your weakest first, typically speaking. So if you're in the top 25%, you're almost never laid off. Now, here's the exception to that rule. If a company says cut 10% off of every team, you may have some high performing teams in your company, which are all 10 rock stars, but of the 10 rock stars, the worst rock star is the one that gets cut from the team. They still keep the rest. So that's kind of what's going on. So that's always been the secret for me, keeping people from getting laid off. I either made them the best of the best. I got them involved on very high end projects that were so strategic to the company they couldn't be removed. I moved them to revenue producing positions and educated them on the stuff that the bigger, more powerful roles, the communication, the working in between people, the leading people, all that stuff that AI couldn't do or outsource, and then they're safe. But you never want to be in a technician level, hands-on without planning. Hands-on with deep planning, great. Hands-on without planning, not so much. DS, any feedback on the ISAAP as a security architect? So there is an actual security architect certification they have. And, the reality is it's a good certification. I don't typically use it, and I don't typically use it for this reason. The real heavy security architecture stuff is not in any security certification, that heavy duty people, whatever. So I train that stuff. Now, I like the CISSP for the following reason. It's the same reason I love the CCDE, but don't recommend it a lot. Not a lot of people know what the ISSAP even is. But they do know what the CISSP is because a lot of tech executives and CISOs and other people were there. So I typically like the CISSP. Now, where the CISSP lacks is cloud security. And I like the CCSP for cloud security. And where the CISSP and CCSP lacks is in what your customer will think of as an architect. So that's where I typically use the CISM. So there's nothing wrong with that certification, the ISC squared, ISAP. It's a very good certification, but I've found that the formula that I use is getting people much better results at getting security architect jobs. So that's why I found it. But DS, if things change, if that starts getting more brand recognition, it's there. It's kind of like when I tell people I'm a CCIE, they know what it was. When my friend was saying you tried to tell people what a CCDE was, they didn't really know. So he's like you, Mike, right? I'm like, yep. But they didn't get it. So that's why I picked the ones that I picked. But it's a great certification otherwise. Great certification. And this is the last question I can do at this point. Which TOGAF version would I recommend, 9th or 10th? 10, obviously always 10. And then we have one quick question from Jose that Chris can respond in the chat box or I'll answer. So I recommend 10 because 10 is a little more of a digital transformation framework than the 9th. At the end of the day, it's an architecture framework. So it's a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. And where did this come from? And I can tell you why. So there was a period of time in my life where I had injured my foot and couldn't walk for a few years. So while I was doing my rehab, I went back to practicing internal medicine as a volunteer. And I joined my wife in her clinic. And the reason I'm telling you this is when I went in, I had an orthopedics background. So every patient that came in, I had them take off their shoes. I started looking at their feet, working their knees, their hips, their back, till I got to their head and their throat. And my wife saw what I was doing and she laughed and she says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "A lot of my time is musculoskeletal. I start from the feet." And she laughed and she said, "This is internal medicine." She had me follow her around and we started with the eyes, ears, nose, throat, chest, heart, lungs. And she said, "Here's your checklist." And she said, "Follow my checklist because this is internal medicine, not orthopedics." I was like, okay. Now, that checklist, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, was the best thing because it kept me from forgetting things that I was supposed to do. And that's exactly what TOGAF is. It is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. Now, my wife's checkoff list that said check these first would have been meaningless to me if I didn't know how to examine the head, eyes, ears, nose, and throat. And TOGAF will be 100% meaningless to you if you don't understand enterprise architecture or don't know, because all it's going to be is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, which is why a lot of people get disillusioned with TOGAF because they think it's going to teach them architecture, and I promise you it won't. But if you are an architect, it will give you a really great checklist. Yes, start with the architectural vision. Then let's get to the business architecture. Let's evaluate the data and the applications. Now let's evaluate the rest of the technology. It's a step-by-step process, and that's really TOGAF. But it looks great on a resume. It gets people interviews on a resume. It is designed with the steps to provide digital transformation versus the cloud failures that 80% of architectures are out there. So it is a great certification. But the key to remember at the end of the day is it's just a checklist of steps. But I recommend TOGAF 10 because that's pretty much where everybody's using, and you don't want to do an outdated one from the start. So, Jose, so it looked like you asked for some information on LinkedIn about our Cloud Architect program. I'm going to invite you to a webinar we have on Thursday, and on this webinar, we will talk about the Cloud Architect role, what we do, the skills you need, the skills you don't need, and I'll answer any question you have. So I hope to see you on this free webinar. We'll run it tomorrow's Thursday, so we'll do it tomorrow. And any questions you want to ask me on Zoom, I'll do anything I can to help you. I really do care. If you've enjoyed today's Cloud Architect question and answers, where we discuss Cloud Architect careers, security architect careers, AI architect careers, the economics and finance and challenges and various technology careers and the strategy behind technology careers, maybe give this video a like. Please join me on tomorrow's How to Become an Architect webinar. We'll go over the architect role, what we do. I'll give you secrets and tips to make sure that you can do better in your career, not get blocked by HR when you don't have experience. I want the best for you, and it's all free, so please sign up. And then I'll answer any questions you have, including look at your resume, give you mini interviews, or anything I can to help you, and it's live and free on Zoom, so I hope to see you there tomorrow. And maybe subscribe to our channel, hit the bell, and tell a friend, because we want to help as many people as we can build the best tech careers. I'm retired now. For me, my retirement job is creating the next generation of tech leaders, and I hope all of that's you. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you soon.